Welcome to Stories from Prepress, where I talk about things that happen in Prepress in a printing company and, all of the funny things that happen. Well, I'm getting ahead of myself. Anyway, today I'm going to be talking about a actually quite funny story about a customer who, well, let's just say, was struggling. And before I get into that, I will say that all of the customers' names, if they are named in the stories, and coworkers and companies will not be named because of NDAs, so non-disclosure agreements. There's an umpteenth of those in the industry, and I will be respecting all of the non-disclosure agreements by just not naming names and, just having a good time here. So, welcome to Stories from Prepress again. I hope you enjoy. So, the story. This customer has always had this pretty decent designs where they are, regularly low res in some parts. And by low res, I mean low resolution images where they're fairly pixelated or not, depending on how many pixels per inch there are in the image. So, that being said, this customer, which has been a fairly long-standing customer of ours, they bring us this file, and I look over it, as I always do with files, and I am just baffled. Like, this customer sends us this file, and it's nowhere near print-worthy. So I bring the pre-flight checklist, which is what I go through, and it's a paper and pen sort of checklist. So I bring it back to the customer service person that I'm working with for this job, and I tell him, we cannot print this job right now. It's just awful. Like, there's so many low resolution images, the size is wrong, it's just a hot mess. And we start talking about it, and he's telling me this poor customer, it turns out, had their designer and their layout editor both quit on him. And when the customer service guy, we'll call his name Nick. So when Nick tells me all of this is going on with his customer, I am instantly just feel sorry for this customer, because that is like worst case scenario. You're having to slap stuff together last minute to get it all out the door. Oh boy. So, whole bag of worms with this job, and whoo boy. So, I go back with the customer service guy, and we talk about it, and we figure out what exactly actually should be happening versus what the customer can actually do. So, we decide that, well, there's low resolution images, there's not much that can be done, and apparently, as the customer service guy tells me, this job came in even worse condition. And by that point, honestly, I was kind of laughing because it was just so bad, and I just felt so bad for the customer who gave us these files, that he is struggling to get these files to us to get something printed at this point. So everything ends up working out, thankfully, and the customer gets something in his hands that's, fairly decent. Not anywhere near what it used to be quality-wise. But yeah, so thankfully we got something out to the customer, and it was pretty decent. And so, it passed my checklist, at least, and so that was print-worthy. Not the greatest, but, yeah, that's kind of what happens on a regular basis. Fortunately, with customers bringing us files that are, quite honestly, in my opinion, a hot mess. And then we look at them and see what we can do and tell them yay or nay, or hey, we need high resolution images. Please give us the high resolution images, and then we'll go from there. And usually we can replace them, or we'll have the customer replace them. But yeah, you really, like that job, you really never know what you're going to get into. And unfortunately, I had picked this job up, oh gosh, it must have been like 4 o'clock on a Friday night, and we usually get out at like 4:30 at this job, which is great. But when you pick up a job that's a whole can of worms at 4 on a Friday after a pretty long week, and I had this very time sensitive errand to run, so I was like, oh, I need to get out the door, but like, I need to be detailed with this, because all of my reports are something that I really try to be very thorough with, and I want to put as much detail and as comprehensive as a picture together about this job as possible, so that if someone else picks up this job, or if the customer service person looks at this job and is like, oh my gosh, they know exactly what's in this job and what it will require to get this job print worthy, so the customer can have a decent quality printed piece. So yeah, that was quite the job that I had to work on for that Friday. I just remember putting it into our system, and so our system looks at, like, does it have RGB on it, does it have spot color, does it have low resolution images, what the size is. I mean, it's a pretty extensive printing software, so it looks at all aspects of the files that we put into it and run through it. And so I was just going through what the system was saying, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I have like so many flags with this job. Oh my gosh, how am I gonna get out of here on time for my really time sensitive errand? I'm just like, just not one more flag to look at. I'm like, oh my gosh, no. So thankfully I got my errands done, and it was all good, and everything worked out. But man, that's part of the pressures of the printing industry, is there's so many quick deadlines. I mean, yeah, customers, especially, well, right now it's just before Thanksgiving, and so many of our customers are having year-end budgets where they're like, oh hey, we have this much to spend on printing, let's go print stuff, and hey, we need it in a week. And some of the jobs are like, oh yeah, sure, we can totally do that, totally doable, perfect, let's do it. But then others are like, wait, you want how many? And your files are not great. We'll do what we can. We are not gonna make promises, or hey, here's a realistic deadline for what we can do that for. Or at least I hope that's what the customer service people do. But yeah, the turnaround for these jobs is pretty insane, and sometimes it's pretty hectic. Yeah, the running joke in my department for Prepress is, oh, you brought more jobs in? And it's a 4:30 on Friday. I'm like, yep, I brought more jobs in. Yeah, it's gonna be a busy week. So yeah, it's a pretty demanding job as far as just getting things pushed through our department and making sure that everything is looked at in detail as well as quickly. So there's a fine line between, hey, let's do this really well the first time, but also let's get this through really quickly. So sometimes we can only do, let's do this really thoroughly, and we can't necessarily do quickly, and sometimes we can do both. So yeah, it just always depends on the job and the quality that is of files that's sent to us. So note to self, or note to all of my viewers, if you don't know how to set up files properly, there is a whole slew of YouTube videos, or better yet, just ask your printer of like, hey, how do I need to set this up? What colors do I need it in? Like, by colors I mean either RGB or CMYK, which depends on what the printer has for machines, but usually it will be in CMYK. Or like, do I need bleeds, or do I need crop marks? Usually yes and yes will be the answers. And if you don't know what those are, have them explained to the best of their ability. Google it. There's tons of YouTube videos. There's just so much content on the internet, which can be good and bad at the same time. But if you don't know, ask. Hopefully your printer will have a really helpful answer for you, and then you can set your files up correctly so they can process them really quickly, and then you're off on your merry way with a really great printed quality printed product, which is always the goal for every printer, unless the customer's like, oh yeah, whatever. We have some of those, but you also have the people too that are like really stickler. I tend to kind of be like that because I look at the files and I'm like, I want this to be really high quality. Awesome. Totally also doable if you're able to give us that content. But yeah, so if you really don't know how to set files up, look it online, YouTube it, Google it, ask your printer, all really great resources. Would highly recommend all of the above, if you can. So yeah, it is quite a complex industry, and I think sometimes people think, and I'm not saying this to judge anyone, I thought this too, before I was part of the printing industry, that we could, as printers and prepress technicians, that we could just wave our wands and poof, just make everything better. And sometimes we can, sometimes it's that simple, just a couple clicks of a button and voila. But oftentimes it's not so, and there's a little bit more complexity involved. But yeah, it is, I would have to say, probably my favorite job of all times. Not that I've been in the industry for very long. I've been at the company for 2 years, and really honestly learned about the printing company in those past 2 years. As a graphic designer who went to school for also that degree, I was never really taught or told about the printing industry, really. Like, we had some interactions with printers to be able to print our own projects for classes and whatnot, but like pre-flighting for larger printing companies I never heard about that. And so when I started working out in my company for like the manual labor, putting things together for before shipping, and like shrink wrapping and boxing and all of that good physical labor stuff, I learned a lot about the company and the process, and it's a really heavily domino affected industry or company in general, that if one department is bottlenecked, well, there's something else that's not getting work, or someone else is also struggling. And so yeah, it's pretty wild to now be learning about the printing process, and from customer to printed product, like what's involved in all of those steps. It's pretty mind-blowing. I'll probably end up saying this quite a lot because it is mind-boggling how many hands one piece of printed material has to go through, from digital files to a printed piece. I mean, we're talking, the customer has to handle it. Usually there's a designer for the customer, then there's the sales reps, and that can be anywhere between 2, sometimes even 3 layers of, this guy brought the job to this person, and then our sales rep brought that job to us, and then finally the file gets to our company, which then gets processed and the job ticket gets written up by our customer service personnel, and then the customer service personnel brings it to the Prepress department, where we look at it, fine-tune it if possible, or tells the customer service person, well, we need this XYZ format, we need high-res files, or whatever it might be for that job. And then it either gets to the digital department to get printed, or it goes over to our imposition people, who then impose it on the large sheets of paper, multiple versions or just the same version multiplied on one page, and then it gets plated for the press, and then it gets to the press, and then from the press it then goes to any number of places, whether it's mailing or I don't know, like the stitching to get bound as a saddle stitch book, or gets perfect bound, and then it makes its way to hand bindery, and then it might also make its way over to mailing, which then it will get shipped out. So you see, like, the process every hand in the process is can either speed it up or slow it down. So it really depends on the workload we have, B, how complicated the job is and how many hands it needs to go through in order to make the product what the customer wants it to. Um, so it's just so many pieces to the puzzle to figure out, and sometimes I kind of feel bad for customer service personnel because they have to figure it all out before the whole process gets started. So it's quite crazy sometimes. Sometimes a little chaotic, but we always manage to get it out the door and to do our best. And so yeah, it's pretty cool. Yeah. So I hope you enjoyed my little rant of the printing process and that delightful little print job that I had right before going on the weekend on a Friday. So I really hope you enjoyed that, and I will come back with more stories and more tidbits about printing and the printing process and what I do as a prepress technician. Thank you.